Hello there everyone, or anyone, or whoever happens to have logged onto this video. Greetings from Sri Lanka with my little kitten Sele. Thought I would start this video with kittens because why not? She's adorable. But I actually wanted to just make a little bit of a video today to share with you guys my experience of the last year. In particular, what has happened for me and my relationship with alcohol. Sometime yesterday morning or within the last 48 hours, I've clicked over to my 1 year no beer anniversary, and that's been a cause of some reflection for me. And I kind of thought that even just for my own sake, having an opportunity to talk about that and to share my experiences would be definitely helpful for me and maybe helpful for others. One thing at the start of this video I'd like to say about alcohol as an issue is that for me, particularly through this year of not drinking, I'm very aware that people respond to alcohol differently. People have different relationships with it as a substance, and it's not my intention to try and convert people into a lifestyle of sobriety. I know many people who manage their alcohol very well, and I'm quite jealous of you. But there are people like me out there for whom alcohol kind of paints a different picture, and it sits in the background of our lives, and there may be other people who are at a point where they want to kind of reevaluate how they approach drinking culture. Not necessarily to make the decision to stop entirely like I did, but just to at least reconsider what drinking is and what it means to you. So there's a bit of background noise, but I guess that's all part of the Sri Lankan lifestyle. There's some crying dogs because it's been raining, so I think they're probably a bit miserable. And lots of birds also because of the rain. So it's a nice little background soundtrack. So I think the first thing I kind of wanted to share and talk about was the moment that I kind of made the decision, because it did happen in a moment. It was something that I'd often thought about or considered for many years prior to the decision being made, but never at a point where I actually felt like I was going to make a clearly defined decision to change what I was doing. And so I was here at my house in my bedroom about a year ago, pretty much to the day. And I woke up after a large and fairly unexpected binge drinking session. And I'm sure many people have had this experience where you wake up and as soon as your brain starts to kind of come to terms with the day, before you can process anything, you're just overwhelmed with these questions of yourself. Firstly, you feel like shit. So you're dealing with that physical stress. And then there's the questioning of like, what did I do? Who did I offend? How much damage have I done to my reputation, to my relationships, to my friendships? And your instinct is to go to, for me anyway, to go to quite a dramatic place. That doesn't necessarily meet the reality of what had happened whilst under the influence, but when you don't have the frame of reference to make sense of it, it immediately escalates into this kind of mass scale panic. And I've done some reading on that as well, and there are obviously physiological and chemical reasons associated with alcohol and what it does to us and our brain in that moment that kind of supports that those moments of anxiety are a natural byproduct of drinking and a significant part of the hangover process. So that's the state of mind I was in. Woke up and very abruptly was like, holy shit, like, don't really remember getting home. I know from the memories I do have that I was not a coherent individual for a lot of that experience. And I had messages on my phone from people asking me if I was okay, which is one way of making somebody not feel okay in that moment, because I was like, oh shit, why wouldn't I be okay? I also had a screenshot from a friend who actually evolved into being somewhat of a mentor through this process for me of a phone app that is guiding people through sobriety. And So it was implicit in a sense because there was no text attached, but quite an explicit mention of like, maybe you want to consider this. But the thing about all of that was that for that time and that phase in my life, none of that was particularly unusual. That feeling and that stress and that anxiety associated with the hangovers and having other people be concerned for me to a degree was not a one-off occasion. And so I was lying in bed and I did have quite important things to do that day. It wasn't a Saturday that I could just lie in bed and mope the day away. I had to get up and deal with some actually pretty serious tasks. And I was just like paralyzed with anxiety, unable to fathom how I was going to get out of bed, face the day, face the same people that I'd seen the night before in a different context, and what strategies I was going to try and use to minimize that damage, to like make sure that everything was okay without like admitting that I was as worried about it as I was. So I was really just lying there trying to work myself up to a point where I could start the day. And maybe not to this extreme, but I do think a lot of people can probably relate to that feeling with some hangovers. If it doesn't happen regularly, then sure, but I'm sure you can think of a time when you're like, oh, maybe things got a bit out of hand. It's not a nice feeling. So I was going through my usual kind of self-talk routine that would help me out in times like that. And because none of this in and of itself was anywhere near enough for me to make any decision. That wasn't even really in my thought process. The decisions was really, how do I get through today? And then one of the mantras or kind of self-talk that I would use in these instances as a voice that would say, you're going to get up and you're going to get through it because that's what you do. You've done it before and you'll do it again. And this is the part where something started to trigger, the voice in my head that said, the worst part about all of this, Curtis, is that you will get through today and you will be totally fine, but you're going to be back in the same place, feeling the same thing, not too far from now, like maybe in a matter of days, maybe a week, but in the near future, you're going to be lying here in bed, feeling like shit and having to go through all of this again. So just don't waste your time being upset about it. It's a reality. It's your reality. Get up and just get on with life. And for whatever reason, on this particular day, when I said that to myself, I had a different reaction to what I normally would have, which normally would have been to agree with myself and to dust myself off and get up. But on this particular day, I realized that that was me talking to me. Those were thoughts and affirmations that I was creating for myself. And that if I didn't want to have this experience again, if I really, truly did not want to be lying in bed on a morning regretting the night before and feeling so awful, then actually I did have the power to control it and to stop it. But the result would be that I could no longer drink. Which was a big deal for me because I love beer. I've always loved beer and beer's always been my drink of choice, never really been into wine or spirits or anything. But the idea of actually saying, shit, so to stop this, I have to just not drink beer. It has to like go, was kind of overwhelming, but in that moment, it made sense to me. The kind of predicted loss that I would feel about not being able to drink a beer in the afternoon, and even though that was a difficult thing for me to overcome, the payoff of not having to feel like this again, ever, on that day, the balance shifted, and that was when I made the decision that that's what I wanted to do. So I did a couple of things right off the bat, and as a kind of maybe a piece of advice in a sense for anybody who is feeling a similar kind of way, I did a couple of things in that first moment that I think set me up to having a successful year so far, and it is an ongoing process. But first thing I did once I made that decision was to commit it not just to myself but to other people around me. So I immediately picked up my phone and composed quite a long text that I then distributed and sent to all my family and to my kind of social network here in Sri Lanka, who were going to be the people who I needed around me at this time. And it was a very strongly worded commitment to myself and asking others to play a role. And the reason why I did that was because I knew that if I was only accountable to myself, I probably wouldn't do it. It's quite easy to cheat yourself out of these things. But if I'd made this strong statement to people who I cared about and who I respected, and really committed to say, guys, I'm really going to do this, then if I did crack or stumble, I wasn't just letting myself down, I was letting other people down. And that raised the stakes, because if you let yourself down, we bounce back from that pretty quickly. The other thing I did was very stereotypical, but actually I think it worked, was that I remembered that I did have one small beer in my fridge. And part of me thought, okay, great, like, just go, say goodbye to beer, take that beer, drink it, enjoy it because it's your last one ever, and then be on with your day. And then straight away, the more sensible thought was coming in saying, well, I mean, if you do that, you're undermining yourself before you've even started. And so I did the thing you see in movies and announcements and all sorts of stuff about taking the beer and symbolically tipping it down the sink, which I actually think made, I will never know, but I do think probably made all the difference in setting that expectation for myself, that my first hurdle is facing me within 30 seconds of making this decision, and how I respond to that is going to dictate how I respond to the many that are going to come in the future. From there, it was, to be honest, it wasn't as difficult of a process as I thought it would be. I started to see benefits very quickly. I didn't immediately immerse myself in large-scale social events where I would be tempted. I was kind of selective about where I would go and who I would be with. But for me, the big thing with cutting out drinking completely, the hardest part was the drinking at home, like the casual social drinking that you would have with dinner, and knowing that I couldn't even engage with that because the two were so closely connected for me. So it was just being really certain with myself and those people around me that no, I wouldn't get a beer. People weren't offering me beer, so the temptation had definitely reduced. And I think the first 3 weeks were probably the hardest. I don't remember having a point where I ever really had to face a crisis and go and reaffirm that decision. I think it always kind of came quite naturally to me. And because of that, very quickly I started to feel benefits. And that has been a huge pillar in getting me to stay on track with this. So I started very simply with just like getting up earlier in the mornings every day, stretching and awake, which is something Dad had been trying to get me to do for a long time. And then that evolved into a more thorough kind of health and fitness routine. My mental health and my ability to handle stress at work and in personal relationships just got way better, and I felt way more confident in a lot of areas. And whilst a lot of these benefits and things that I feel have been growth in the past year probably could withstand a relationship with alcohol side by side. They're not like completely intertwined. At least psychologically for me, the success that I felt over the past year is I've built it upon the foundation of sobriety. And so I do have a tie that makes me think, gosh, if I have one beer, if I give myself that simple pleasure, then maybe I won't get up and stretch tomorrow morning. Maybe I won't maybe I won't cook tomorrow. Maybe like all these things that I've kind of attached to adds extra weight. And I've only got 15 minutes to make this video, so and I didn't expect it to go for that long, so I actually will wrap up. The only other thing that I kind of wanted to hit onto as a point was, and it feeds into this video, that probably the biggest thing for me that has helped me be successful is to talk about it. I feel like sometimes that's annoying to people, like, oh, there's Curtis the sober talking about being sober. But as much as being a drinker or being a beer drinker specifically was part of my identity, people knew that about me. Curtis will drink beer and he will drink a lot of it. I've had to supplement that with Curtis is sober. And it is something that I do have to acknowledge and kind of not lead with at the front of who I am, but I do make it quite clear to people that is something that they can expect from me in their interactions. And that has actually been, I think, really helpful as well. Anyway, I am running out of time. If you have any other questions about it or you want to talk further, drop me a message. Happy to chat. Hope you're all well. Much love, and speak to you soon.